Well, Jen, I love hearing you do all the announcements. I rely on you to be my eyes during this because I'm sharing my screen, so I don't get to see all of everyone come through. But I'm looking at the attendee list. It's so nice to see a lot of names I recognize and I've been working a lot with recently, both as individual advocates in states. Karen from Ohio, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to get to work with you, know you a little bit more. So happy to have some new names on here. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to go ahead and jump in now. We'll start with a few introductions. My name is Chris Melfi. I'm the FASD United Policy Coordinator, and I've been lucky enough to have this position for about 2 years, where I have just been, in my eyes, welcomed in with open arms to the most, and I don't want to step on Susan's toes for what she'll say, patient and hardworking community of advocates I have ever seen. And we've had quite a bit to celebrate at the end of this year. You know, we've had a few of these policy forums happen directly after big successes where we get to see all of these new faces and old faces stop in. So I just want to start by welcoming everyone, thanking you all for being here, and let you know that today I'll be backed up by my FASD United policy team with Jen Wisdall, COO of FASD United. She has been with the policy team since she started with FASD United, and she's also a parent to individuals with FASD. We have Susan Shepard Carlson, who is former board chair and chairs our policy working group here, graciously donates her time and energy every single day. Also have Tom Donaldson, president of FASD United, wealth of experience. Tom, it's always nice having you here to jump in when we need some historical perspective. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it right over to Jen right away for some organization updates from FASD United.
Right. Well, again, excited to see everybody here. This has been a huge moment for our organization and something we've really been working on hard for quite a while now to get done. Just a quick announcement that registration for the International Conference on Adolescents and Adults with FASD will be opening up before the end of the year. So keep your eyes open on that. And there may still be a brief moment to squeak an abstract in under the wire if you haven't submitted an abstract yet to speak at the conference. Last time we hosted it, it was about 650 people from 28 countries attending. We're hopeful and ambitious that it will be even broader and bigger this go round. So really encourage you to stay engaged with that. Additionally, I need to
Jen,
make,
can I just interrupt a little
yeah,
bit of that because I'm on the committee and I'm reviewing abstracts, and I tell you, just the abstracts that I'm reviewing are super. I mean, it's going to be a fabulous conference, so I just wanted to put in a plug for that.
thank you. Yeah, it's really shaping up to be a tremendous, and this is the conference that also has a track for and by adolescents and adults with FASD. So not only does it have the research component and the clinical component, but it has the living experience component. And I think that's a really important piece of that puzzle. The other piece on this is that grants don't fund policy work. Um, and so the work that we've been able to do as a community here have really has been funded in large part by donations from folks like you. And so we are definitely putting out an appeal that if this kind of work, if what we're doing here is important to you, is important to your organization, your family, we really encourage you to contribute because policy doesn't fund itself, unfortunately. um, and we'll talk a little bit about how the funding from this policy work will work as we move forward. But really encourage you, if you haven't become a monthly supporter of FASD United, we really hope you will. We hope that you see value in the work we're doing and that you will be willing to contribute. So with that shameless plug out of the way, we'll get down to the nitty gritty of today. So I'll pass it over to Susan.
Well, I tell you, folks, we've been, when I think about this journey that we've all been on, it's this is a big, big deal. And I know I've, like a lot of you have probably read the social media comments, and just to see the excitement of those that have been along on this journey is so heartwarming. And, you know, and I think about where we started and what we've been through. And I was telling Jen and Chris a story that I learned early in life about success. And we have to really savor success. But these, if you look on the screen, and those are the qualities that really will lead to success. And I have to say that they just hit the mark. The ability to stay calm and composed in the face of frustration, setbacks, or slow progress. It involves a focus on the long-term game and building sustainable success. I can't tell you how that so applies in this effort. And we were talking about, we're going to need to go through what has gone on the last 2 Congresses and even before that, but then it's also persistence and staying persistent. And that's a lesson that I hope that all of us have learned and will need to learn, patience and persistence going forward, and combining those, which how it keeps us motivated, and success keeps us motivated, and it's looking at that prize in the end and when it's not quite there. So let me thank you for all of your patience, persistence, and perseverance. This will set the stage for how national, state, and local governments address FASD informed support for the long term. It is a big deal. Jen, Chris.
I just heartfelt gratitude. And I would say that, patience, persistence, and perseverance, those are hallmarks of the FASD community. That is what we as a community are about. And so, there's no question that we were going to be successful. It was a matter of when, right? Because we are not people who let go of a challenge. We are not people who give up. We are not people who let down the people who are counting on us. And so as a community, I just see this as a massive win and a huge step forward, and just a glimmer and barely even a glimpse of what we are capable of as a movement. So I just encourage all of you as you're here to really reflect on this success and know that we have it in us as a community to do so much more, because the people we love and care about with FASD deserve more. And we're going to get there. And I'm excited to do it. And I'm excited to have you all along on this journey with us. So on that note, I will pass it over to Chris. Sorry, I had the soapbox for a minute there.
So glad. No, if there ever was a time, it's right now. And I think these 3 Ps have been key and will continue to be incredibly important as we move into our next phase of advocacy. To give everyone here a brief overview of how this meeting will play out, we're going to talk very quickly about how we got to this moment. Not only what happened in the last year, but the actions that all of you took to make sure that we could get to this phase of FASD advocacy. After that, we're going to have a brief conversation about what it all means. Not only what the FASD Respect Act bill means, what's in there, but what passage means for this movement. From there, we'll have a brief conversation about how do we continue to be successful in this next phase of advocacy. And what that means is how FASD United can support this community and how the whole community can continue to work together to ensure that the programs in the FASD Respect Act are implemented equitably and sustainably. Because the goal here is that these programs make it into our communities and they outlast whatever funding schedule there is, and to make sure that we don't have to start over in 5, 10, 15 years, but that these services don't only stay in our communities, but continue to grow side by side with a greater understanding of FASD and the needs that we have. So I have our first timeline event here as January 16th of 2025, but really it starts back much further than that. And Susan, please feel free to come in because I believe you got started on what we know as the FASD Respect Act around 2019, working with Senators Murkowski and Senator Klobuchar. And again, please feel free to jump in, but the first version of the FASD Respect Act was considerably longer and maybe more directive. And it was asking for specific departments and agencies to follow specific directions. Through your hard work, through your experience, but also through relationships developed with Senate authors, House authors, not only by you, by Jen, by Tom, but by all the advocates here, by having their meetings, we were able to learn more about what successful legislation and what successful advocacy looks like. And that is when the bill that we know as the FAC Respect Act was pared down from a larger bill into something that was closer to maybe 4 or 5 pages as we know now. But Susan, do you have anything you want to add to the early days of the work that you did there?
Sure. Just a little historical perspective. Senator Murkowski introduced a reauthorization bill every Congress except for one since the authorization expired. And so her heart was always in it, but there was never really any push like what we accomplished in this. And then when I came on board, the FESC United, I actually took her bill and worked with Dr. Sally Anderson to rewrite that bill. So I didn't, and so it was really Senator Murkowski's original bill, or one of the last bill before. And so that and I think it was like 64 pages, and it's a good bill. And I would have loved to have passed that bill. And Jen will remember, one of the first meetings we had with staff, they said, do you want a newsletter bill or do you want a pass bill? And I thought, why would I want to just have a newsletter bill? That doesn't accomplish anything. So that set the stage. We said, no, we want to pass a bill. Well, I think lessons learned through this whole process is that bill probably would never have, it would have taken us a lot longer to pass a bill like that and have a hearing and all that. And we learned that we needed, I got a directive, we need to pare it down for inclusion as an amendment. And we had to figure out what were our priorities. And through all of the meetings that we had, it became really clear that it was the capacity building for state and local units of government, along with a Center for Excellence or technical assistance from the feds, and having that leadership, that interconnectedness. So that's why it got pared all the way down to what you see today. So that's, and otherwise we'd still be working on it, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Susan. And that knowledge, that experience came because of your connection and other advocates' connection that came through hard work,
Yeah.
persistently meeting and communicating with senators and representatives. And so 2019 is when work on the FASD Respect Act in earnest began. We're showing a huge jump here to 2025, but in the meantime, we know that all of you had hundreds of meetings, spent thousands of hours writing, calling in, emailing to make sure that we could get to the point we are now. The amount of momentum gained between 2019 and 2025, I think, is incredible. And all of the feedback we've gotten on the success of this movement is focused on how unique this grassroots success was. And I think it loops back to the persistence, patience, perseverance that Susan had mentioned before, that has been vital and will continue to be vital as we move in. So as I present this timeline, it's going to look like, wow, all of this work was done in such a short span, 1 year, but I think everyone on this call knows that you've been working on this for quite some time.
Well, Chris, can I pause you for just a second? Raise your hand.
Please, yeah.
if you
Yeah.
sat in on an advocacy meeting.
Yeah.
Now keep it up if you sat on 5 advocacy meetings over that span. Keep your hand up if you sat in on 10 or more advocacy meetings during that time span. Keep your hand up if you sat in on 20 or more advocacy meetings during that time span. Keep your hand up if you sat in on 50 or more advocacy meetings during that time span. Keep your hand up if you sat in on more than 100 advocacy meetings during that time span. Like, we are talking thousands upon thousands of meetings with legislators. This didn't happen because one organization signed on to a, letter of support. This didn't happen because of one advocacy meeting that one person went to. This happened because of a collective, over time, year after year, month after month movement. So I just want to highlight that because I think that's a really important consideration for now and for how we move forward.
Yeah, yeah. And Laura is saying Dr. Sally Anderson would be so very proud. And for you who don't know, she was really instrumental in the drafting and guidance. And she was head of executive secretary of the ICC FASD for many years and did so much for the field. And having her guidance was really very helpful. So yes, she would be just thrilled with what happened.
Thank you both for those additions. And what we're going to see throughout the successes listed in this timeline is that success builds on success. And that comes throughout the last 6 years of, again, the countless hours all of you put in any form of advocacy. I see so many people on these calls who, sure, they were in 10 different meetings, but they also solicited 100 letters from locals to send to their Congress people. They were going out to businesses to make sure that they were FASD informed. It takes so many different forms. And what we saw in 2025 was the fruit of that labor. And the first way we saw that was after the FASD Respect Act was introduced in the Senate by Senator Murkowski. 3 short months later, when the Support Act, this larger bill dealing primarily with substance use and opioid prevention, was introduced, the Respect Act language was automatically included right in there without any need for us to go and lobby and ask for them to put it in there. And again, I bring that up because that compounds the work done by all of you in years past to make sure that those who sit on the committee that write the Support Act understand what FASD is and what the FASD services we need are. Again, it's hard to overstate how important it was to have the FASD Respect Act automatically included in the Support Act when it was introduced. That, from just a parliamentary point of view, made everything so much easier. And again, that is all because of the work you did to socialize this bill for years and years. We saw that this bill, the Support Act, was placed on a fast track. It made its way through the House committee and then the full House fairly quickly, passing through the House on June 4th. A few months later, many of you were here in town in Washington, D.C. for 2025's FASD Impact Week, a mere 2 days after about 100 of us went up to the Hill to meet with legislators. We got the call letting us know that the Support Act was being fast-tracked through the Senate and was passed through unanimous consent by them. Normally, what this would have meant was within just a few days, the bill would have formally been presented to the president, but this was 2025, and it was not a normal year by any means. So the government shut down, and what that did was it paused the timeline of not only our bill, but any other bill that didn't have anything to do with the budget or national security. So that bill just kind of sat in limbo for quite some time. You can see over 2 months, over 2 months before being presented to the president last week. And then we all got to have the most incredible start to our weeks of the entire year by finding out that the Support Act was signed into law by the president on December 1st with the FASD Respect Act. included right in there. You know, I can see, I can only see a few people on my screen, but I can see a few people happy dancing. And what we're gonna do, what I want to do before Jen and I and Susan jump into a conversation was, because this can feel a little anticlimactic because of the long range in between. Okay, it's passed the Senate. Okay, it's finally been presented, and then once it's presented, we have to wait. If we can just, if there's a moment, if anyone, I can see there's people sharing some questions in the chat. Jen, Susan, Tom, I know we've already shared a little bit, but Tom, we haven't heard from you. Is there anything that you wanted to add just to highlight the momentous occasion and maybe add a little bit of a, you know, put a candle on the birthday cake here a little bit?
Well, thanks, Chris. Yes, and hi, everyone. You know, it's been 25 years since FASD authorizing legislation passed in Washington, D.C. So obviously, this is a momentous occasion. And yeah, I know from talking to so many of you over the years that you know, many people would ask, what now? Why is the federal efforts what they are? Could they be doing some other things that maybe would be more directly supportive of families? Uh, and just uncertainty as to what might come next. Well, now you're in charge of that in a sense, because this is legislation that all of us helped draft and all of us got passed. And so I think everyone has, this field, this community has earned a voice now going forward in all decisions that are made, funding, and how those funds are used. So it's important in so many ways, and just really grateful when Susan joined the board, rejoined the board, and said that this is what I want to focus on. And boy, did you ever do that. And then have the chance to bring Jen on. Uh, I want to mention, I don't know if they're on, Kate Boyce Reeder, Mike Anderson, Christy Petrenko. They're really, really important to our policy efforts over the last few years. And of course, all of you. And Chris, you have been so important in making sure that we're all in the right office, in the right meeting, and have the right message in advocating for the bill. So it's obviously momentous, and we have many things now on our agenda. I'm sure we'll talk about that today to go forward and to leverage this success and capitalize it on behalf of everyone.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, and that's exactly right. There's plenty on the agenda. You know, I think we're all excited to see what the next steps are. But quickly before we do that, I'd like to invite Jen in to have a conversation about what this actually means. And then again, not only what is in the bill, what will happen because of this, but what the passage and actual signing of this bill into law means for the FASD community. It was already alluded to, but there's a lot of discourse going on about FASD on social media right now because of the passage. I hope everyone has been able to see all of the different social media posts. Here are just a few of the different comments that have been floating around, both on some of our posts on Facebook, on Senator Klobuchar's, that just highlight that there's a real need to talk about what's in this bill, what isn't in this bill, what was the intention of this bill, and I think what's most important, what does it mean to you and to your family right now, and what does it mean to you and your family in the future? So there's a lot of questions, again, not only about what the bill itself means, but what passage into law means. I think this totally makes sense. We haven't seen a bill like this in about 20 years, and I think it's really important to have an understanding of what the Respect Act means for you and your family. Now, there's a lot of chaos with all those other comments on there asking, does it do this? What about me? What's next? Where does the money go? This was a comment taken from a self-advocate here in Maryland who I took the name out just because I took the name out of all the other comments, but I know they've been vocal about getting the FASD Respect Act passed. And this is one that just made me feel good, just because it's very, just obvious and right there. I'm an adult with FASD. This is huge news. It's our turn now. And I don't think they meant it's our turn compared to it's the kids' term, but it's FASD's turn. And, you know, I don't think we were given this opportunity. I think all of you took this opportunity through the fantastic work you've been doing. My work for the next however many years is going to be motivated by comments like this. You've all done so much work to get us to this point. Now we need to keep going and make sure that we can capitalize on these successes, because you're all right. It's your turn now, and we need to do everything we can to work in the same direction here. So Jen, if you're off mute and able to come on, I would like to, you know, have a back and forth conversation and maybe ask you a few questions as someone who, you know, you have a unique perspective. You know the bill inside and out fairly well, I'd say, working on this, but you also have the perspective of being a family member, a parent, and you have close connections, obviously, with your kids, but with other members of this community. And I think you'll be able to provide some good questions. And I know if you can't, we've got Susan and Tom who can jump in and help answer questions as well. But first, I just wanted to ask, when we're talking about this bill being an authorizing bill and that it authorizes programs and it authorizes funds, what are we talking about when we say authorization? What does authorization mean in this sense?
That's a really good question, right? So I feel like Schoolhouse Rock lied through its teeth. Because it doesn't work that way. So authorization language or an authorization bill gives permission to Congress to spend money. It doesn't tell them that they have to spend the money. It says they can spend the money. And if they spend the money, here's how it needs to be spent, right? So this language was really important. This reauthorization bill was really important because we needed to update the focus of how funding was being used so that it was more modernized with the time, you know, including FASD, not just FAS, looking at support and services, not simply prevention, you know, all the things we've learned over the last 20 some odd years in the field of FASD, we needed that there. So what it does is directs how any federal funding on FASD, this tranche of funding, is being spent. Now, that is very different from, I think, your next question, Chris, which is appropriations. What we have is we have authorization language or authorization bills that allow and say how the money is going to be spent. We have appropriations bills that say how much money will be spent. So this bill says we're going to be, the FASD Respect Act talks about how the funds will be spent, and that there is up to 12.5 million. Now, if we look at everything that the FASD Respect Act is saying it needs to do, 12.5 million doesn't even begin to start, right? But when you get an authorization bill passed, you can only pass it for the amount that is currently appropriated. Now, you can ask for more appropriations above and beyond that, and we're gonna, because we need it. But the authorization language shapes how any appropriated funds are spent. Does that make sense so far? And I like break in the chat if you have any questions on that.
Well,
but yeah,
and Jen,
Schoolhouse Rock doesn't cover that.
Yeah, so Jen, I just want to add, and I think this is really important. If you look at Senator Murkowski's statement on, I think it was on Twitter or X, whatever. And this legislation will build a more informed and responsive system of care for those with FASD by strengthening prevention efforts, expanding diagnostic capacity, and improving coordination across states, tribes, and local communities. So that was Lisa Murkowski's intent on what this bill will do. And so then obviously the devil's in the details and how we go forward with that.
Absolutely. absolutely. And thank you for that. So this authorization provides what we call congressional intent. What does Congress intend by to be done with these funds? So, and then appropriations is the budget that gives the money. So what we will be doing over the next 5 years, because the authorization is good for 5 years, is we're going to be asking for more and more and more on the appropriations, so that in 5 years, when it's time to renew the authorization language, we will have been talking to our legislators every year, not waiting until year 5 to do it and having to start all over again. And when they reauthorize it, they'll be reauthorizing it, hopefully at a higher threshold, because every year we have the opportunity to request more in appropriations, adding to the tranche of funds that can be used to provide the congressional intent, which is that coordination between states and state programs, and building the FASD state and tribal systems of care, and providing, again, more support. Does that cover it, Chris?
I think so. I have one quick follow-up question there. I want to ask a little bit more about appropriations, but back on authorization, I know, Susan, you had mentioned back when the whole bill was being written, you were asked, do you want this to be a newsletter bill? And obviously the answer is no. This has to have some concrete programs and services go to the community. But what does authorization do in terms of visibility of FASD,
Oh,
in terms of
oh,
legitimacy of our programs and the ability to get more appropriations?
oh, it's huge. I mean, right now, the federal government was operating on no authorization for FASD programs, and the existing appropriation reflects that. Now, Congress can, and then I think they're trying to get away from this. They can appropriate without authorization, and they can authorize without appropriations. But I think more and more it directs the federal agencies on what is important. And now, I mean, so much has happened in 20 years. This is it gets us back to the seat at the table. Now there's a seat at the table, and there's direction from the federal government on what should happen in this field. And the federal government can only do so much, and they've got a lot of funding that goes to states. And so the states are going to be an integral partner with the federal government in building this system of care that's FASD informed. And so that's where all the advocates have the ability to direct on how that goes. And it's not just funding, it's also looking at eligibility, and states, and we'll be looking at states and federal government on the eligibility, and having that authorization really says this is something where FASD needs to be included in those eligibilities. So
Susan, that's perfect. I'm glad you mentioned that because my next question has to do with states and a federal response, state response, local response. It seems like money will be going different places. And so, Jen, I'm kind of wondering, is this a situation where you say there's 12.5 million authorized, let's say 12.5 million is appropriated, who gets the big, clearinghouse lottery check of 12.5 million? How does that work?
Right. There was somebody who commented on Instagram, I think it was, about, does FASD United get this money? And I'm like, gosh, I wish. We have absolutely no say and no control as an organization. None of your organizations do either, by the way, on how this money is spent. The money goes to the federal agencies, who will then, following the congressional intent, create programs that they fund either by giving money to the states or by doing an RFP, request for proposal, for organizations, nonprofits, other organizations to carry out those tasks, right? So it would be fabulous if, you know, an FASD organization just got a great big check and was able to take it and run with it. But, you know, think about if that happened, would that be sustainable? Would that support the entire community? Would that do what we need it to do to incentivize states to begin looking systemically at how they support people with FASD and integrating FASD into those systems of care? No, it wouldn't. So, you know, if we look back at what happened with the last time there was a big amount of funds done, there was a Beltway bandit. So it was a government contractor that came in and got the Center for Excellence and got all that funding. And they didn't lobby for it. They didn't advocate for it. They just came in and got it. And then they wasted a whole bunch of it because they didn't understand FASD and what needed to happen. Now, eventually, a lot of good things came out of the Center for Excellence, but so much more could have happened. And so I think this is an important call to action for all of us when we're looking at, as agencies are putting out RFPs, as agencies are connecting with states, we have to be connecting with states to ensure that the funds are going with the congressional intent. And we have to be on the lookout for, as the RFPs come out, you know, are we doing what's right for the entire community, or are we simply serving one organization? And again, the agencies are going to be vetting the proposals and all that. Like, we don't have a say in it, but we do have a voice when it comes to congressional intent. So no great big checks, unfortunately, coming to us, but there is hopefully in fiscal year 2026 some funding coming out to states. And then as we grow the appropriations, the intent is that more and more money will be coming out to states to begin working on their systems of care. And I see Karen has a question.
Yes, Jean, for those federal agencies that are going to be receiving the funding, I know you said they could do an RFP or pass it on to the states. Are those federal agencies HHS and CDC still?
We had to leave it up to, I want to say it was NIH, right? What's the name? No, it's
Secretary of HHS
yes.
will
Thank you.
make the determination as to which agency within within HHS. Currently, that money is with CDC, and there's 1 million at HRSA, and CDC primarily does surveillance and some programmatic work.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, those agencies might change also because of what's been happening with the reshuffling of agencies and priorities. That may also change. So we have to be on the lookout for that. And that's something that, you know, on a state basis, keeping your eye on, you know, which programs might, just keeping your eye open for those opportunities, because what we don't want to have is the FASD funding comes through, nobody notices it, nobody applies for it, and the federal government goes, oh, we don't need this. That would be terrible. But my hunch is that it'll go in some way, you know, through some of the existing pathways, but it might take a different look than what it is doing currently. So Joel, you had a question?
Yes, ma'am. Happy holidays, everyone. Talk about programs that would benefit everyone. I have some ideas what that might look like, but I'd like to hear from the perspective.
Well, yeah, Joel, let me answer it this way. The reason that the building FASD state and tribal systems of care became a priority, much of the language that you see in the early part of the legislation was taken from the expired authorization. So that is where you're going to have systemic change, and everything will filter through how states do funding. on their programs and having it be FASD informed care. And they're part of the direction in this bill is they need to look at this strategically and determine what programs existing could be adapted. And that would include looking at eligibility. And they're supposed to report back to Congress. So if you're going to have systemic change and rather than just piecemeal programs, because we have a lot of good, what I would call demonstration programs on both sides of the equation. You've got with prevention and intervention. But the key is to make it systemic. And so, and I think what was so helpful in our meetings with staff and members of Congress is what parents would say, that the systems are not responsive to our needs, whether it's education or our medical, whatever it is, they're not responsive. And so that needs to, so it needs to start from the ground up. And how do we make our systems responsive rather than a piecemeal? So it's getting states ready to do that. And that's where the grassroots can really begin to inform their states on what's going to be required and what's missing. What are the barriers?
Yeah, because my thoughts are what qualifies, right? And then what's the measurables if it works or not. Those would be part of that process.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And we know some success models out there that could be replicated, right now.
Yeah.
Right. But it was those stories of parents that we do not have a responsive system. I don't know how many times I've heard, oh, nobody knows about this.
Well, in the Minnesota FASD task force, that was the main thing that came through in their findings as well. Nobody knows anything about this remarkably prevalent issue.
This is designed to change that dynamic once and for all.
Awesome.
Thank you, Joel. Kathy, we'd love to hear from Kathy.
Well, it took me a half an hour to find the raise my hand thing. Well, if they don't know in Minnesota, which is where I would move if I could move, they sure as heck don't know in North Carolina or virtually any place else. But aside from that, I have one question and one comment, which is kind of a question. I don't know, you keep saying eligibility, Susan. I don't really know how you're meaning that. And the other thing is, in 2017, we decided to name our organization NCFASD Informed. And the more I do this, the less I think I know or what informed means, because people come to like a 1-hour workshop and they list themselves as FASD informed and therefore they can do therapy with our kids or whatever. I mean, informed is starting, I wish we hadn't used it, but we're not going to change our name, but it seems like a throwaway title. It seems like, oh yeah, I've heard of that is now what it's become, which is definitely a step up from 20 years ago when I was trying to help my daughter's physicians understand that there was such a diagnosis. But I don't know, FASD informed.
Jen, do you want to answer or I can too?
Well, I think you're talking about eligibility in multiple senses. You're talking about states being eligible to get funding, because when funding rolls out, 12.5 million isn't going to go far. So it'll probably roll out to specific states to start with, to start the ball rolling, states that are ready, states that maybe have an existing task force, that have some existing infrastructure. It may be looking on a state level at things like eligibility for waiver services. You know, as much as I'd love to wave a magic wand and say universally across the country, people with FASD will qualify for waiver services, that's actually determined on a state-by-state basis. Eligible for special education instruction. As much as IDEA lays out specifics on special education law, how those laws are interpreted is on a state-by-state basis. So eligibility means a lot of different things, and that's why we have to be working on both the state and the federal front to be able to mesh together this bill and what it does and what we need the states to do in response to it. So that would be what I mean by eligibility. Kendra put in the chat, and I appreciate her doing this, the FASD informed. She put a definition there, and I do like that. I like that definition, and I think that's something that we need to hold organizations accountable to when we're doing FASD. You know, if they're saying it's FASD informed, let it not just be in lip service, right? And that's the congressional intent of the
let me just say, we just didn't make that up.
Yeah.
I actually went to Heather Carmichael Olson because she's the researcher on and has done research on FASD informed. So this came from Heather.
And I agree with that, but I don't think that's how it's used among the lay people.
Well,
that's actually supposedly are FASD informed. That's now a term they know.
Yeah, but that's why it's people, in. Well, that's why it's in the bill, because now it's law, right?
Amanda, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I would just really encourage everybody to read the entirety of the Support Act and look at everything that's in there, because it's from a perspective of prevention, treatment, recovery. And so there's tons of opportunities within, because there's increase in funding in a lot of different areas. And there's tons of opportunities within each of those things to insert the FASD informed element into all of those different things. When you're talking about youth services, you're talking about suicide prevention, you're talking about maternal health, you're talking about, treatment and recovery for substance use disorders, you're talking about suicide, all these things. The whole thing presents as an opportunity to insert what we're calling FASD informed, and then serve as a funnel, if you will, or an opportunity to then get to the specialization, right? To then get to the reality that when we've got all kinds of folks coming through all of these things, mamas, babies, kiddos, youth, folks that are in the whole plethora of provision of services that the Support Act is reauthorizing. If all of those things become FASD informed, then there's an opportunity there for us to get to the specialists and the reality of diagnosis and what that means in terms of eligibility and access to care for all of those folks. And so it's even more exciting when you read the entirety of the Support Act and you understand how many different things are getting an increase in their funding and getting an increase in their specificity around things like prevention and functional assessments. And when you start to look at these other things, so I would just encourage everybody to read through the entirety of the reauthorization of the Support Act and then start to imagine, where does FASD informed belong in all of those things? Because it makes the money grow a little bit. It makes the opportunity of where you can connect with other orgs or other folks that are doing things with the increase in the funds from the other places, where your orgs can then approach them and say, hey, we want to include an element of an FASD training, or we want to include this, and that it kind of multiplies it in that sense when you look at the whole thing. So that's kind of exciting.
Well, Amanda, that's a great segue, because the bill actually directs states to look at those silos. And it's not just because the bulk of that is in SAMHSA, and you've got funding at HRSA, you've got funding at the Administration Families Living, you've got federal. I've read through the whole appropriation bills, and so I'm really aware that there are so many opportunities and block grant funding that goes to states for these. And having states look at that funding they're getting and their current fund that states have, and how FASD informed care can be adapted. I mean, it's not gonna be an easy, but it's such an opportunity to have your systems FASD informed that way.
I think this brings up such a valuable point too. We as an FASD community need to stop looking at this from a scarcity mindset. There are opportunities out there that do not say FASD on them that we can take advantage of and get into. And I think we need to be looking at that. We are growing up as a community and a movement. And part of that is looking at how do we grab our seat at the table, not wait to be invited. And I think, this gives us a great opportunity to do that. And I really appreciate Amanda's point about looking at the co-connectivity between all those different pieces that are provided in the bill. And I know we've got a bunch more things to go over, and we've got like 5 minutes left. So I'm going to pop us along a little bit because I get distracted. I know I'm planning on staying on a little bit longer today if people have additional questions, because I figured there probably would be some. But you had more questions on this, Chris, about the Respect Act. Do you want to just pull up all the questions and that we can kind of talk about what we haven't covered?
We had a few of them get answered. So I think we did kind of touch on what does the Respect Act mean for current federal programs. And we talked about how, now Congress has rededicated themselves and the country to addressing FASD through the lens of support. Do you have anything else you want to add to what that's going to look like in terms of funding structure? I think you did a decent job.
Yeah, I think we kind of talked through that.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah, and I think if there's more questions, absolutely we can address them, at the end. But I think looking at, what this means for me and my family, it's not a magic wand. It's not immediately going to make things better and provide all the supports and services that people with FASD have a right to. But it does give vision to it. It does shed a light. It does give awareness. It does give us the opportunity to do more. I think the next thing we were going to talk about, and something that's a really big thing, is how can my organization access the funding? How can I get the funding? The funding's there. How do I get it? Right? And that's the biggest question that we've been asked. I can't tell you how many emails Chris has fielded from that, how many phone calls, how many people who've wanted to have a Zoom meeting to talk about that. How does my organization get the money? Right? And the true answer to that is that's not up to us, right? That's going to be based on when the funds roll out to the agencies, how the agencies determine, obviously with congressional intent, and as we are talking to our legislators and informing them, it's either going to be rolled out to the states in specific ways to do things, or it'll be rolled out to directly to nonprofit community organizations, things like that. But that would be an RFP where you apply directly with the agency, or you apply as a subcontractor to somebody who's already gotten that funding and get the funding that way. I think the big thing for states is to be prepared. If you can have a state task force, that is going to put you well on your way because it shows you're ready to accept funding. So getting a governor's proclamation to start a state task force or a state committee, or getting legislation that mandates a state committee. And we've got draft legislation that we rolled out a year ago to get that going. So those things are going to be important. Do you have a state plan? Do you know who are people working in your state government in each of the agencies that FASD touches? Do you have those names, those phone numbers? Do you have relationships built with them? That is how your organization is going to get access to the funds. It's not a magic wand, congratulations, here's your check. I wish it were. We're going to have to do the same thing. All of us are going to have to do the same thing to be able to access the funding in this, and also to safeguard and make sure that it's being used in the way that Congress intended, which goes back to the language in Section 104 of the Support Reauthorization Act.
And I must say that really the intent also goes where that particular section, if it goes to the states are going to be doing RFPs for various pieces. If they find there's gaps in diagnosis or gaps in training, whatever it is, they can issue RFPs on those. So like Jen said, this is we want to do it right. We don't want to do it. And so, because it's going to come back to Congress to see what has transpired, and it gets to sustainability, and it gets to what's the plan of how you infuse FASD informed into all existing funding streams where it's applicable. And you guys are the experts in this in your communities. So you need to be an integral part in that piece. So
the other
Terry
piece to
asked
that
a question on 104. Is 104 the second?
just before you go there, Susan,
Yeah.
I did want to say though that one way we can influence the agencies to ensure that they're doing what the congressional intent is, and it aren't just, you know, kind of writing it in, is when we are providing the grassroots momentum to get more appropriations, that carries weight. If we are coming with funding saying, hey, we're working on getting more funding appropriated so that this can happen, the agencies do sit up and take notice of that. Now, they cannot by law and by ethics say, oh, you, Tom Donaldson, you came in and got this appropriation, so we're going to give you this money. It doesn't work that way. What it does do, though, is you, Tom Donaldson, may have some insight into, this is the needs of the community, and this is why we've advocated for these funds. Therefore, and these funds are now here, we can create the report language around the appropriations that says, how those appropriations are to be used, and it can't be directed towards any one organization or agency. But in us as a community working together to increase appropriations, that also gives us more insight and more of a voice in how the agencies spend the money.
Well, and I just want to add, Jen, and I know we're at the top of the witching hour, but when Jen and I were in DC, God, it was just recently, and we had this conversation with Senator Klobuchar and Murkowski's staff, and about report language, because we know that the 26 appropriations they're in the throes of doing that right now, but we wanted to get report language in about the intent of the Respect Act. And they also said that a letter from the senators on that intent would almost even be more important. And so we'll be following that really closely, because that, I must say, that whole section on building state and local capacity has been in Senator Murkowski's bills consistently. That is really her brainchild, or whoever did that original authorization. And I do think it's the way that it's going to systemically bring our field into the mix. So can I just ask, for those who are staying later, could I ask a question of that, or is that okay? Or just to follow up on what Susan brought up? Jen, is that okay?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So I might have the number wrong, but I understood that for those of us who are like, policy wonks, in section 104, I understood it was section 104. It has the language that is related to the Respect Act. And when I say so the whole bill is
HR 2483. That's the whole bill, the reauthorization bill.
Mhm.
But the one section of that big long bill that pertains to the FASD Respect Act, I thought was section 104. I could have that.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's
You're
the
right.
whole,
Yeah.
that's basically the same as what was introduced in the Senate, but for this, there's not a Center for Excellence in that language.
Okay, so my question is, in the bill that was passed and the bill that was signed, what's a thumbnail explanation of what happened in that section? Like I've heard you talk about the appropriations part of it, the language related to the money and stuff, but what about some of the specific policy stuff that the section outlines? Is there anything you can give in that, like, oh, it does this, these bullet points, I'm just, that's what I'm curious
We've got summaries on the website, and I mean, that's been, the abbreviated Respect Act all along. So
Yes.
you can get the, go on the, I think,
Okay.
I mean,
I just
you
thought
could
maybe
go over it
some-
again, I suppose, but
I think a lot of people, there's some people I know that I brought a couple people to this call today that don't know anything about this. Is like, okay, now that it's passed,
Yeah.
now they want to know about it. So people who haven't been following along, but I can take the question offline. I can just direct them to go look it up online. I just thought it'd be nice to kind of hear for some of the newbies what's policies are going to change.
Yeah, but, and
So-
I do say that that building FASD state and tribal capacity is probably the most important section out of that 104. And there's two main sections. And just a thumbnail, most of that first section was updated authorization from the previous authorization. The other section is totally new. And and if you look at the one that was introduced by Senator Murkowski, it had a Center for Excellence. When it went to the House, they didn't want to have a Center for Excellence. So what they did was take out some of the key components of that section, and so there's things that are in there that they would like a Center for Excellence to do, but they didn't want to call it a Center for Excellence. So that's kind of, I know it's late and people's eyes glaze over on all the
But Chris, I think Chris has a couple slides that we had intended, and until
until we got, yeah, that's true.
yeah, that kind of go through that. And Chris, I don't know if you want to go through slides 10 and 11 really quick, if you're able to do that, because I think that, if Terry has that question, I think others may have that question too.
Mm-hmm. Is this where you're thinking of? I'm not able to
That's
see
exactly
the
what I'm
page
thinking
numbers.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Terry, what you're asking totally makes sense. I know you have some new people on here. It's what we generally go through. And what Susan was mentioning as that new section that isn't just a reauthorization is what is going to allow states to examine their existing systems, right? Have the ability and the resources to go in and take a look. Okay, here is where we're missing FASD. FASD should be touched by this system, by this agency, by this department, but it's not. So they want to figure out how to do that. The other part that Susan mentioned is the reauthorization of these programs that have already existed, but rather than just keeping them on, maybe a RAL towards focused on 100% prevention or something like that, they may be realigned a little bit to fit the spirit and intention of the FASD Respect Act. And here we can see we have the three pillars of what is really meant from the FASD Respect Act. And we've talked about this all along. It signals a rededication to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, prenatal alcohol exposure, and more and more prenatal substance exposure through the lens of support and understanding. So support for individuals, actual support for families. And again, this is moving away from maybe more of a siloed view of prevention, 100% prevention based. What does that actually look like? Again, that looks like integrating FASD supports into existing systems that can be both at the federal and state level. Coordination. So that's coordination. This is really the first time, as Susan mentioned, where we have this national framework that is directing states on how they can best update their systems. So it's coordination from state, from federal government and state, but also within states, coordination and communication. So, maybe you have your State Department of Labor communicating with the education. So we are able to give supports to young individuals with FASD where maybe traditional schooling and college might not be the right path. How can we help them enter into the labor force, right? And then again, going back to what Susan mentioned, this is the real heart of the Respect Act for many, strengthening capacity, making sure that our states, tribes, and federal government have the tools and resources they need to go in and actually make some changes. Again, what can that look like? That can look like training for professionals and general awareness campaigns, with the caveat that any of these programs that we create or modify should be focused on systemic change. So I think we're past the point of just trying to get, as Kathy Hotelli mentioned, people FASD aware. I would argue, Kathy, what you were mentioning, those organizations, at best, they're FASD aware, right? It doesn't sound like they're super informed and they weren't trained. So if we have the training, it has to be aimed at how can we make it so these systems are changing to be equitable and sustainable. But Terry, as Susan mentioned, we'll send you over everything. But I think thanks for asking, just for anyone that jumped in.
Yeah, we probably should have done these at the beginning, more at the beginning, because we got hung up on questions.
We did have a few other questions in there. Susan, I'm glad you jumped in and mentioned somebody had asked about the amount of money that we expect to be allocated to the Center for Excellence. As you mentioned, the Support Act version, that language for the Center of Excellence is not explicitly in there. However, maybe the functions of the Center of Excellence are in there, which makes answering your question about the amount of funds even harder than it already would be.
Yeah.
I think the big push that we need to be working on now, though, is looking at how do we move forward from here? We are going to need to be working on appropriations. And working on appropriations is very similar to what we've been doing before, but this is going to be maybe with a different set of legislative aids. And having those meetings and talking to them about why it's important to strengthen the federal response to FASD through the Support Reauthorization Act and authorize additional funding to carry out the congressional intent of what was covered in that bill. So Chris has put together, and I got to give him a pat on the back because this is some of the best work I think he's done. It's really, I'm excited to see this fully roll out, but we have an advocacy impact calendar that is going through on a quarter by quarter basis the activities we need to do to both sustain the work of the FASD Respect Act and also to increase appropriations. So that's going to be sent out shortly. There was a thing in the chat about it'd be helpful to have a news release with a high-level brief summary. So Senators Murkowski and Klobuchar have both issued news releases, as has FASD United. You can find ours on our website. So those have gone out through the press wires and everything. Senator Klobuchar, I believe, is having a press conference in Minnesota this week, possibly, to talk about the FASD Respect Act. So those materials are available, and we can push those out in an email as well. The press release didn't go out in the weekly roundup because Senator Murkowski's press release hadn't gone out yet, and you have to wait till the senator puts out their press release before you can put out your own. So it didn't make it in this week's weekly roundup, but we will get that out via email. In terms of local organizations getting on our mailing list, if you go to the FASD United website and link over to the policy site, you can sign up for policy updates. You can also, through the FASD United site, sign up for the weekly roundup. And that's a weekly digest of anything FASD related that's happening. That's been running for the last 13 plus years consistently. So definitely please sign up for that. And Jenna, I'm just going to call you out really quick here because you've had some great comments in the chat. I'd also direct you towards our education survey and the work our education committee is doing. So I would really encourage you to get a hold of us if you work in the education space and get involved there. We have an education survey that's currently soliciting responses, a national education survey that's been worked on by numerous people throughout the country. And that data is going to help us make the case for additional funding and maybe some changes when it comes to special education, because we know how important and how challenging that can be. Definitely, we will get the advocacy calendar out, Sid. I see that in the chat. And I think you'll be excited to see that, because I think it's got some really good information in there, and I think we'll probably go into more detail on that in the January meeting.
And Jen, I found it interesting when you you asked artificial intelligence about IDEA and FASD, and they say, well, no, it's not, but there's legislation, the Respect Act passage will help move that, move the field towards changing that. So,
yeah, well, having federal legislation passed on FASD legitimizes our cause.
exactly.
So now if we were to go to a state and start talking about this disability that impacts a child in every classroom, 1 in 20, we are no longer a fringe parent group that's giving this information that may or not be true that they have to verify. There's federal legislation supporting what we're talking about. So I think that's another way that this bill, even if the funding never touches your organization, even if we never, like that in and of itself is a huge win, because now we have a basis for states and for other federal agencies to start taking us even more